Hi.
Hi, Rick. How are you? Good to see
Well,
you.
from the west coast of Canada to where are you now?
I'm in Italy,
Italy. Yes.
in the
Wow.
great heat of Italy.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? I've been hearing lots of not great news. The weather apparently or the heat is just enormous, eh?
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, there was some rain with hay. The day that I got here, it was like there were like little golf balls. It was kind of scary, actually.
Oh
But
wow.
yeah, here I am. We're like a little bit closer, but still 9 hours apart.
Yes. A little bit closer, an hour closer, eh? But yeah, no, I mean, thank goodness for technology, and anybody that's listening or watching, there might be a few glitches. The internet connections are not exactly spot on, but it's doable, and we're
Right.
trying some new technology right now, and we'll see how it all works out. But anyways,
Right.
thanks for dropping in, everybody. Whoever's listening and watching, we appreciate it. We did take a little bit of a break last week. Um, it was just not in the cards, was it?
It was just not in the cards, right? When life comes in and disrupts your plans, right? You
Yeah,
just go with the flow, right?
yeah.
It's
You you
whatever.
you have to right. It's sort of like, especially what I notice is, for myself, if there's a big struggle to try and manage the circumstances, in other words, it's just not working like it was last week. It's better just to drop it and wait for a better time, kind of a thing. um I'm starting to realize that there are no rules, in the sense of, the only rules that are there are the ones that we create for ourselves.
Right, right. And I love how we're talking about how our plans were disrupted, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
today's topic is how to beat the disruptor, right?
How
Because
to
we often
be.
talk about how do we respond to things when they drop into our lives, and it's not what we expected, which honestly, it's a false belief that we can even predict anything that's ever going to happen, right? But we try really hard, and we
Yeah,
often get disrupted by things, circumstances, events, people, right? Things don't
yeah,
go according to plan. And we often talk about how do we show up in those moments? How do we respond instead of react? And today, instead, we decided to talk about how do we disrupt? How do we intentionally disrupt? How to be a disruptor? What does that mean, right?
yeah, yeah,
To disrupt, because I feel like sometimes like all labels, the label disruptor can have a negative connotation, can sound a little rebellious, right? But I think it would be really useful to look at all the different shades of it and what it can actually mean and how can we disrupt more intentionally to create a more intentional life, to stand for the things that we believe in, and all the different meanings that can have, right?
yeah. And the first thing that comes to my mind uh, is a selfish nature to being a disruptor. Like, it can be like, sort of like, oh, there you go again. you know it's all about you, and that's a cultural thing, right? So
Right.
when we're trying to just be disruptors, in other words, for me, being a disruptor is there's something I need to break away from. Like, I'm either falling into a belief, I'm falling into a cultural norm, and it doesn't feel right. So there's this notion of breaking free. But there's another side of me, again, it's conditioning, is the selfish nature of kind of self-care, looking after yourself, being disruptive for a positive outcome, as opposed to, because, like you said, they're, being, most people, when we say, disruptor, they're thinking of people that disrupt rock concerts and other events because, they're protesting against something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And like really at the base of disruption, there is some, you know, disagreement going against the grain, right? That going against the grain is also often what we talk about in coaching, right? Just sit down and question everything and make a conscious decision about the things that you decide to follow, believe, do, take on, believe, and adopt in your life, right? Because we oftentimes just fall into things. And then the moment we realize that that thing doesn't quite fit us can come really quickly, or it can come a lifetime later, right?
Yeah.
Bottom line is, the moment that you realize that something doesn't fit you for whatever reason, whether it's an act of rebellion or it's an act of self-love, like you were pointing out, there's a disruption that needs to happen. And the more intentionally we do that, and the more we are really steering that boat towards the direction that we want it to go, versus just going where the current is taking us or where others think that we need to go, right? And so, yeah, we call it disruption, but sometimes that disruption truly is realignment with yourself. So that's one meaning, right? That's one meaning. That's one way.
Yeah. And for me, like, I know you, like you said, like, there are things in life that we have no control over. Like I would say most of things in life we have no control over, including the internet connections, or the weather, right?
Or the air conditioning,
or the lack of air conditioning. But most of where I feel I need to disrupt is when I get hooked into this belief that it has to be a certain way, ignoring what's really going on around me. So it's more about letting go and pushing away from, and then falling back into what I would call like the stream or the flow of life, the way life seems to be going, as opposed to fighting it, which is where I need to disrupt myself, is when I'm caught up in the fight, when I'm caught up in a battle. And sometimes I don't realize that that's what I'm doing. So,
right.
But it does take it does appear at times that it takes a drastic measure. And this is where I like the word disrupting, because it feels like a really strong disconnect. It's like, it's like really pulling the switch down and saying, no, I am not going to do this anymore.
Exactly. I mean, it's very much like behavior change requires pattern interruption. That's a disruption of the pattern. Yep. It's always been going in a certain way, a reaction, a way of behavior, a way of thinking, right? It's always gone in a certain way or been in a certain way. And the only way to redirect that is by interrupting it, right?
Yeah.
So being a disruptor can very much be the change you've been looking for. If you can rid yourself of the conditioning, the disruptors are people that come and disrupt order, and they're, like doing so in a negative way.
Well, right? Well, it appears to be negative, but that's only a subjective cultural thing, right?
To our own individual judgment.
Yes, absolutely.
We label it and how we judge it. Yeah,
yes. Because like for me, like when you look at all the, if you want to label them disruptors, if you look at all the innovators out there, like the people that are really pushing the envelope on things, you could label them as disruptors, because they're going outside of what culturally everybody thinks is supposed to be normal. And that's where we get trapped into. We get trapped into this idea that to get along with the world, you have to conform,
right?
And and what happens every time I try and conform, there's almost like regret, there's sadness, there's depression, there's fear, there's all sorts of sort of negative feelings that, and then you go, well, I'm just trying to fit in.
Kind of yeah, there's like sometimes what I realize is that there's the mind labeling, right? The mind is running its program based on conditioning, right? Based on social conditioning. We judge something or someone to be a disruptor, right? And so it got this negative, we label it as negative, right? And then there's what we feel, right? Deep inside, what do we call it? Intuitively, we call it the higher self. We call it what's in true alignment with ourselves. When those two things clash up against each other, there's a sense of discomfort, right? So again, going back to the feeling is always the thing that will tell you whether or not there's something to look into, right? So in this case, it would be, do I need to question this, right? And what about this person disrupting or not conforming to everything the way everything else and everyone else is triggering me, right? And so it's very much about really keeping open all possibilities versus going straight into the conditioning that we all have. Frankly, we all have conditioning. We all have ways of looking at life that are automated, right?
Yeah.
So I actually think that disruptors are, like you're saying, going to change the world because they're not conforming to, and like conforming to something also implies that things are never changing. The things are always going to stay in a certain way, right? So having a little bit of disruption here and there is actually useful to our own evolution as human beings, as a species, socially. Otherwise, we're just going to stay where we're at. And that doesn't seem to be how the human evolution has gone.
No.
Right? We keep evolving, we keep changing, we keep restructuring ourselves, our society. Like everything over the years is eventually going to change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, change is inevitable. It's a constant, right? Like I was talking to a guy yesterday on my hike, and we talked about how things look to be so disruptive right now, particularly around climate change and various other things. And not to say that anything is not real or it just seems like there's a lot of interference. Like there's a lot of uncertainty, and part of what is pushing people is to try and get back to some kind of normalcy all the time. It's always like we want to, as if that's our default. Well, what if being normal is not our default? What if our normalcy is to continue to be disruptive, to continue to be innovative, to be more creative, right? Because when you think of all the other, the creative types out there, a lot of them are considered disruptives, right? I mean, Picasso, right? Threw the art world on its head, basically.
Right. I mean, even something that we talked a lot about, like the psychedelics, right? Just think about how many people were thrown in jail and like considered like dangerous drug dealers, and now that whole thing has turned on its head, right? It's not legal yet everywhere, but that is another example of we have labeled for so many years something as wrong, as criminal, as dangerous. And now a whole other truth about it is being not just shared, but also widely accepted and adopted, right? And things are changing. So is anything really ever completely true or, like the acceptable way to be, or an acceptable belief? Everything is relative, to be honest, right?
Yeah. And it's our willingness to experience a change is the one thing that holds us back. Like,
absolutely.
And, and as you were speaking, I started to, reflect on some of the norms and the disruptors, right? The image that came to my mind was, segregation. When segregation in the United States and various other parts of the world was so prevalent, right? People had to sit on certain sides of the bus. They could only go into certain entrances and all that until there was a disruptor. Right. And brought, was the change immediate? No, but it almost seemed like it took that as a catalyst. Like the disruptors are the catalysts to provide change that moves us from one level of understanding to the next level of understanding. And I know in the principles community, in the coaching, we talk about levels of understanding, and the levels change as we realize that our current understanding is limited. But there's the normalcy piece, right? It's like, I'm happy, so our worst enemy is our current understanding.
You know what our worst enemy is? Comfort. Because
Yes.
we just want to stay there, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
there's value in comfort, because comfort can also equal relaxation, right? And just being in the moment, right? But if it lingers too long, then we start questioning things, right? We stop questioning things, and we can just kind of keep going by default, right?
Yeah.
So
No, that's a good point. That's a good, I mean, but so that's an interesting thing, because part of the way I coach with clients and things like that is I tell them, like, follow the feeling.
right.
And part of the following the feeling is if things are starting to feel like a struggle, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong going on, right? It's more or less, more about your thinking about the moment that's causing the struggle. But when you're in a flow state, when you're aligned with your purpose and life are kind of aligned, there's a lot of disruption that's going on, but you're having a hell of a lot of fun, and you're quite content about it. I've been running a bit of an experiment for the last month on my mini blogs. So on Instagram, I've been doing daily, Monday to Friday anyways, these mini blogs. They're just, short, a few paragraphs, but they're more in detail, but they're designed for disrupting anybody's thinking.
Right.
And because it's, as an experiment, I want to see, first of all, I had to disrupt my own thinking about doing it.
Right.
Because, part of my persona is a bit of a soft-spoken, pleasing, I don't want to, have too much attention, although this program does bring a lot of attention in a positive way.
Right.
But it's funny. I'm really looking for, and I haven't found one yet. So if you happen to be that one person, please make a despairing comment. Challenge my thinking. I want you to challenge my thinking.
Look at that. Rick is looking for being challenged.
It's just like, it's like
For heated conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to pretend I know, have all the answers and stuff like that, but I feel, part of my plan for disruption is an internal one for me, right? So, I notice particular patterns. Well, I'm disrupting them by doing basically the opposite,
Right.
and just seeing what happens, right? Just see what happens.
It's so interesting bringing up such a important topic, because I don't think you're alone in that, right? There's different kinds of personalities and people, right? I would call myself a disruptor, right? I have something to say, straight shooter, right? I will say it, I will bring it up, and I'm not going to be worried about what that's going to do, right? But what I noticed is that, like you're pointing out, oftentimes people don't even want to say what they think, because they don't want to disrupt or like break that harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Harmony is just truly on the outside, right? Because if you're putting a nice face on the outside, but you're brewing on the inside, that harmony is fake, right?
Yeah.
That harmony is not truly what is happening, because underneath something completely different is happening. And I truly don't think that you're alone in that. I see that time and time again, right? Where for the sake of not keeping the peace, we don't speak our minds, right? Or I've also noticed how people may get uncomfortable around even a conversation where you challenge what's being said, or you express a different opinion than the one that's being expressed or that's like widely agreed upon, right? Because then that's like conflict, right?
Yes.
I found that to be really, really interesting. This actually came up while I was in LA, and like there was a conversation about something where we didn't really all agree, and one person just was like, "Oh, so there is a lot of conflict,"
Mm.
and I disagreed. I was like, "This is not conflict. This is difference of opinion.
True.
You know, it's a difference of opinion, and both opinions can be valid and accepted and heard and expressed.
Hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be conflict just because we don't agree on something. We're just expressing different points of view.
Yeah.
Now, what part of you is uncomfortable with
Hmm.
that difference of opinion, right? That's
That,
really where the work is. The work is not that we need to stop having a conflict. There is no conflict. There
yeah.
is two people expressing different opinions about a certain subject. I don't find that to be conflict. I find that to be diverse
Hmm.
and helpful to see other perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another very common pattern that I notice in people. Like, I don't want to get an argument. You're not getting an argument. Just what part of you is uncomfortable
Well,
expressing what you
the only
think.
argument, the only argument that really gets developed is when you take on the role of being correct.
Right, exactly. Or you take on, or you close your ears to anything else that's being
Well,
expressed.
yeah, because
You're
I'm
right,
right. Like, why should I listen to anybody else? I'm right.
right. Or that in on itself alone, right? The concept that there's a right and wrong,
Yeah.
that in on itself is the wrong point of view. That it's the wrong way to look at it. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about hearing all points of view.
And that part is when I like that because that's a disruption. That's
That's
a
a
disruption. That's a
disruption.
disruption in our thinking. That
Right.
so we're proposing now as part of the disruption. There's no such thing as right and wrong. There's a
Right.
differences of opinion, but there's no right or wrong. Now if for as part of the exploration, what differences in going forward could that make in any of your conversations, in any interactions that you have, if you took on the idea that there is no right or wrong? Because
Right.
that's how disruptions happen, right? It's like
Right.
somebody takes a stand on something and says, you know what, I get to sit on this seat in the bus.
I am in the right
Yeah.
position. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So
Absolutely.
like, and it's just sort of like, hey, this is too normal. Let's break it up. Let's do
Right.
something really radical. Like
Right.
what I remember, one of the big things that we did in the corporate side was, we used to have board meetings that were just one department. You just sort of had the big heads and things like that. And one of the disruptions was to invite everybody, like to have a larger boardroom. And everybody said, well, you can't have that. We'd never get anything done, right? But what was really helpful in that disruption was that it provided more diversity, because most of the problems that people, the executives, were having were so much in their face, they couldn't really see behind it. And
Right.
by bringing people that were not even involved in any of it, brought fresh eyes. And
Right.
there's an article I'm kind of working on right now, sort of called the wisdom in the room. And the wisdom in the boardroom, like when you have that kind of diversity, you get to have more opinions, more thoughts, more fresh ideas, and that's disruptive in itself.
Right. I mean, especially when you consider that oftentimes the problem has been created by a mind
Yes.
person,
Yes.
and same mind is trying to solve the problem. That's a
Yes.
circle, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to have that diversity. It's important to have that perspective. That's very much what we do as coaches. I mean, I would
Yeah.
say if you had to summarize coaching, is offering people the possibility to see different perspectives, right?
Absolutely.
Helping them see that there's different ways of looking at the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But oftentimes, unless you're trained to do that, to interrupt and disrupt and really consider other opinions, you get stuck in a loop of your own thinking,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
as coaches, what we do, we help people break that pattern. We are disruptors, Rick. It turns out coaches are disruptors. We disrupt your thinking, we disrupt your habits, we disrupt your way of life.
Yeah.
We help you see that you can change that. And the only way to change something is to stop doing it in that specific way you've been doing it until then.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's disruptive.
Yeah. It's just, that's all it is. As a matter of fact, I was just looking at I like looking at definitions. Like when we put a word up, I like to sometimes look at the definitions. And so when I looked up disruptor, from a biological sense, okay, a thing that interferes with or significantly alters the structure or function, right? So, like when you talk about the mindsets and the belief systems and how our minds work, right? This is what we're doing. We're interfering. We're disrupting the pattern. We're putting a spoke in the wheel, so to speak. Yes, it looks like you might be falling over, but think of the new direction.
Right. And whenever that happens, there's a little bit of confusion, right? A little bit of feeling disoriented.
Uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty in that, right?
It's uncertain. There's this uncertainty. There's discomfort. There's fear that kicks in, right?
Yep.
So we just revert back to what we know, even when what we know doesn't really serve us.
No.
Because that feels a little better than not knowing, right? Not knowing what else we're going to adopt, what else we're going to believe, how else we're going to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
We're always at all times doing the same exact thing, going back to what we know, to the program.
Well, and it's called, I heard a term today, a prisoner of our preferences.
Prisoner of our preferences. I love that. Yeah.
So, like I love the story of Michael, of Leonardo da Vinci, kind of the thing. Like there's a guy that was always thinking outside the box. And, the fact that he was, that he wrote backwards, that was totally ambidextrous, all these different things that, how we tend to put people into, well, geez, he's starting to use his left hand. We got to force him to use his right hand. All these different things that we think are helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but they're harmful in the long term. Right. I remember, it doesn't seem relevant, but it happens in the same way. Like my wife, for instance, is left-handed, but she was taught with baseball to play like a right-handed person. Mm-hmm. And so she always found it awkward. She always found it awkward when she was up to bat and doing various other things. And one day an insight came, and we kind of said, why don't you just bat the other way? Like, never occurred to her at that point, right? And it felt so much natural, like, because she was always going against the grain, so to speak, of her natural tendencies. So I think that's part of our disruption is that there might be the discomfort piece right at the very beginning because it's awkward, but it tends to fall into place more easier because you're getting away from what actually was more uncomfortable, and now you're falling into the flow again.
You're getting away from the
yeah. And now she could have stayed. It's like, oh, no, this is the way I was taught. This is right, which we naturally do. You take any subject, forget baseball, take any subject, whether it's in your businesses or anything. We get caught up in that. Well, it's always been the way it is, and yada, yada, yada. Well, maybe it is time for disruption. Maybe it is time for a radical.
Has it always been this way? Has it?
Yes.
Right. That's an example of disrupting a way of thinking. Has it always been that way? Really, always? How do you know? When you go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, it's like pretty much everything that we believe in, do, the structure of our society, anything that we have created, we have come up with.
Yes.
all of it, all
Oh
the
yeah.
rules,
We've
all,
made it up.
right? We created all of it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're really just disrupting one way of doing things or being that we have decided, or somebody else, frankly, has decided for us hundreds of years ago, often, right? And we are just empowering ourselves to make a decision that feels more in alignment, more true to us today, to who we are right now.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of what Vision had said in his book. Oh man, I forgot the name of the book.
The code of the extraordinary
Yeah,
mind.
the Code of the Extraordinary Mind, because he talked about the rules and which
Right.
are bullshit rules and all
Right.
these things that we came up with. But you reminded me that all this is everything has been man made, like
Everything.
and
Yeah.
and a lot of it is by people that are no smarter than you are. Really, they
People
just
who have no idea who they were, right? It's just being passed on and passed on and passed on. So
yeah.
much of it is generational,
Yeah.
like it's like who knows how they even came up with it back then, right?
Well, it's the roast. It's very much like, and I'm not sure if it was in that book or whatever, but remember the roast story? The couple, the newly married couple, were having a Sunday dinner, and he was watching his wife cook roast, and he noticed she cut the ends of the roast off, and he asked, well, "Why are you cutting the ends of the roast off?" And he said, "Well, my mom always did it, and apparently it adds flavor to the roast." Oh, okay. So they were at the in-laws' place and having a roast dinner, and she noticed that her mother-in-law cut the ends of the roast off, and she says, like, my wife does that, and you do that. Why do you do that? And he says, oh, my mother used to do that, or did that all the time, because it adds flavor to the roast. Well, grandma just happened to be there, right? So he goes straight to grandma and says, I'm really confused about this cutting the ends of the roast off. Like, can you tell me more about it? Does it really add flavor? No, I cut the ends of the roast off so it can fit into the pot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's such a good point, is pointing to the fact that things that get distorted over time as well.
Over time, we don't
Right.
question it. It's
Right.
just sort of like it's always been there.
Right.
And I remember some of the crazy things my folks used to, the salt over the shoulders. It's like, what do you do that for? It's like, oh, it's evil spirits or whatever.
I do that. Good luck.
It's for good luck. Okay.
You drop salt anywhere, then you gotta throw salt behind you.
But like as a kid, like we don't question any of these things. We observe, we make meaning out of it, and then we carry that meaning into adult life, and then we just think it's normal, right?
Right.
And
We stop questioning. We stop.
well, yeah. We don't
go
want to
with
disrupt. We don't want to disrupt.
we go with the program. We go with the automation of
Yeah.
the belief system that we have adopted.
Yeah.
So being a disruptor, I love how this conversation has really like leaned into presenting this very different perspective on disruption, right? Which goes very much against the immediate perception of the word itself, right?
Yeah.
Which is someone who is oftentimes against the law or being, like disrupting something that we actually like, right? That's the way I feel like we often interpret that word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And
someone that breaks the harmony of things.
Right. And the other, like, but there's that other side, and that's only one portion of disrupting. The other side is from a corporation or organizational point of view, it's being innovative.
Right.
That's part of being a disruptor, is being innovative, right? And then from our own biology, it's interfering with our belief systems, challenging them, right? And that's where coaching and consulting, really shines, is because when you're in the forest, you can't see the trees. And so it's helpful to have other people observing. And this is why sometimes others will see more of you than you will ever see of yourself. You know, how often have you ever had somebody come up to you and said, "Oh, Fatí, you're just, you're such a marvelous, person," and you go, "Well, I don't see it that way." "Oh, no, no, no," right?
So often, so
Yeah.
often. And the other thing that I've actually also noticed is how often people will label me like rebel, disruptor, right? And I now just stand in my truth.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you say that, right? Because this here is why I feel this or behave this way or say what I say, right? So there's a difference there between being passively labeled and like, or when you get labeled and doesn't align and you just kind of say something about it, right? Because that can
Yeah.
also be a disruption of somebody's belief or projection on you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like you're projecting some stuff on me. That's not how I feel, right? That actually happened a lot to me in the last month. And
Mm.
to be able to say, you know what, I actually intentionally said that or did that or behaved this way or questioned that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of brings the other person, gives them pause, right? Because we're so used to labeling and judging others, we don't
Yeah.
even realize we're judging and labeling and projecting,
Yeah.
right? But when someone is completely aware of their own behavior, right? And when you intentionally choose to do something a certain way, or you have done the work of questioning things, then you can stand in your truth and stand by it instead of being reactive, like feeling hurt by the projection, feeling hurt by the comments, feeling like you now need to fit yourself into the label that you were given, which is
Mm-hmm.
very much where we're conditioned to grow up, right?
Yeah.
We just take on everything that's thrown our way and we have feelings around it and we make it about ourselves and about us, something being wrong with us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And,
That's
and,
where our
and yet,
insecurity. Yeah.
right, right. It just really stirs up all the insecurities, right? All the things that we never had and that we needed, right? All the doubts that we have around ourselves. But when that happens, that you have actually actively done this work of reflection, introspection, right? And like actively choosing things and disrupting things, then that doesn't even touch you. It's actually a very powerful place to be in, to not only be the one that disrupts and follows, you know, your own heart and your own alignment, right? But
Mm-hmm.
also to be able to really like stand by that takes a lot of work to get there, right?
It takes, yeah. I mean, it can. It certainly can. But when you fall into like, there's a knowing, and then there's a knowing,
Right, right,
and when you have, sort of kicked yourself away or disrupted, we're going to use this word over and over again, disrupted your, what it appears to be normal, there's a knowing that comes with it.
right,
And this is the thing I notice is, and that's why there is no insecurity. Like,
right,
that this is the path, so you're very much insecure. You are insecure, not insecure. you're, you're very secure. Um, and trusting in yourself. You have a lot of courage, resilience. Like, you have all those good qualities when you're in that knowing that what you're
right,
doing is all the right things, regardless
right,
of what everybody else is saying, right? Because everybody else is, again, like you're saying, projecting their beliefs and special interests, thinking, well, I would never do that. Well, of course you would never do that because I'm doing it.
right.
Kind of a thing.
I mean, the ability to be in that knowing,
Yeah,
you can only feel and notice that knowing once you have done the work of questioning all the things that make you feel
absolutely.
insecure, doubt yourself, right? So
Yeah.
that's very much what I meant. Like, there's a lot of work
Yes.
that goes behind embodying that so that we can, like show up standing by the choices we make, the beliefs that we have, and also like becoming bulletproof with those projections. They come all the time. I mean, I was
Yeah.
with a bunch of coaches for like a month. Projections, cultural differences,
Yeah.
just personalities, right? we all do it. And what was really beautiful about that was that the moment that that was raised, because we're all coaches, of course, like it was also noted, like, the moment that I just pointed that out, right? Noted. We got it. I'm projecting on you, right?
Yeah. And it's not personal.
And it's not personal. It's not.
Yeah.
It was actually beautiful to be able to have these disagreements and like just speak our own truth and say, you know what, that's not resonating. That's not how I'm coming into this.
Yeah.
And to have on the other side someone that's responsive to that kind of way of thinking and interacting with others was actually fulfilling and empowering for both people.
Yeah.
Both. And I did it too, right? I projected too. And I was corrected, if you want to, label it that way, or I was invited to see a different perspective.
That's a gentle way of saying it. Yeah.
Right.
Let me invite you. or and that's another thing. Like, like I said, for most people, I always ask my clients, like, are you willing to explore something different? Right. Because there's I'm not going to force you to do anything. I'm not going to say, well, you must do this. But if you're willing to at least look at something different, which means disrupting your belief system, you could always go back to it. It's, put it on a shelf, go visit it later on. But yeah, no, there's.
I mean, it's very much the way you point that out that also allows the person to receive it or not, right?
Yeah.
Because if I say, like, what are you doing? You're just not true. You're projecting on me. You're just dropping all your BS on me, right? The other person is going to get defensive. But if your response is like, I hear you and I want to invite you to see the way I experience this, you're saying exactly the same thing, but now this person's ears are like wide open. Like, okay, I'm here.
I mean,
what are you telling me?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the difference between talking to the ego and talking to the soul, right? Like two egos will always argue because one has to be right. Well, both egos have to be right, so nobody gets to be right. So it's interesting. No, great conversation.
I know. I missed it. We're gonna do a lot more of this for the next month. It feels in alignment. We feel like we need these talks more and more. We also want to hear from you. If there's anything specific you want us to talk about, let us know.
And share your stories about disruption. Like if you have a good example of where you took the bull by the reins, or the whatever metaphor you want to use. We love to hear your stories, and we'll share them with others and put them on our page. And let us know. Was it difficult? Was it challenging? Did you hesitate? Did you have to try a few times? Let us know. How is that going for you? Yeah.
Because it's important to be able to be that disruptor in our own lives for all the reasons that we discussed today.
All the real good reasons.
Good reasons, exactly. Well, and then if you found this episode helpful, please help us share the love, help us amplify our impact. Just share the episode, subscribe, like, and just comment. Give us a review. Anything that can help us amplify, our reach. It's truly going to help. If it helped you, it's going to help somebody else too. So
absolutely.
Share the love, and we will see you next time.
All right. You'll still be in Italy, I take it?
I'll still be in Italy. I'll see you guys. I may have a different background.
I don't know. I kind of like that. It's kind of like that. Yeah. Anyway. All right. You have a great week.
You too, my friend. Have a good day as my day comes to an end. And everybody else, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and until next time.